It was March 17th, 1941, in the dead of night. The North Atlantic was freezing, the kind of cold that hurts your bones, and Commander Donald McIntyre was standing on the bridge of the HMS Walker. He was staring out into the darkness, knowing that somewhere out there, beneath the 30-foot swells, German U-boats were circling like wolves. Behind him were 41 merchant ships carrying food and fuel that Britain desperately needed. If those ships went down, the war was over. Britain was starving. At that moment, the statistics said McIntyre didn't have a chance. The German submarines were sinking ships faster than anyone could build them. The Royal Navy's main weapon, the depth charge, was practically useless. It was a barrel of explosives rolled off the back of a ship, but it only worked about 3 times out of every 100 attacks, a 3% success rate. You could throw 100 barrels of TNT into the ocean and maybe, just maybe, you'd get lucky once. The Admiralty in London said this was fine. They said the technology was doing its best. They said nothing could be done. But there was one guy who thought they were all wrong. His name was Frederick John Walker. He wasn't an admiral. He wasn't a famous war hero yet. He was a middle-aged lieutenant commander whose career had hit a dead end. He was sitting in his cabin on the HMS Stork, filling notebooks with math problems, trying to figure out why the Navy couldn't hit anything. Walker had been watching ships burn for months. He'd pulled oil-covered survivors out of the water. He was sick of it, and he realized something that the big shots in London had missed. The problem wasn't the weapon. It was how they were using it. See, the standard procedure was pretty rigid. A destroyer would pick up a submarine on sonar. The ship would speed up, charge right at the target, and drop the explosives off the back. The problem was that the sonar stopped working when you got too close. For the last 30 seconds of the run, the ship was blind. The Navy just assumed the submarine would keep moving in a straight line. Walker did the math and realized that was nonsense. German U-boat captains weren't stupid. The second they heard a destroyer coming, they would turn hard and dive deep. In that 30-second blind spot, the submarine was long gone. Even worse, the Navy set their charges to explode at 150 and 300 feet deep. They thought that's where the submarines would be, but Walker calculated that a U-boat crash diving would only be about 75 feet down when the ship passed over it. The explosives were going off way below them. The British were literally blowing up empty water while the Germans sat safely above the explosions. Walker tried to tell people this. He wrote a report explaining that if they set the charges shallow at 50 feet, and 100 feet, they would catch the submarines right as they were trying to dive. It made perfect sense. The Navy's response? They told him to shut up. They actually banned his idea. They said it was dangerous to the ships dropping the charges, and that unauthorized changes to weapons were illegal. They told him to follow orders and stop asking questions. But Walker didn't care about his career anymore. He cared about winning. So he did something that could have gotten him court-martialed. He ignored the order. He started testing his theory in secret. He set his depth charges to the shallow settings he wasn't supposed to use. And on March 8th, he attacked a contact. He didn't get a confirmed kill, but his crew heard sounds they had never heard before. The sound of metal buckling underwater. He knew he was right. The Navy found out, of course. They summoned him to a meeting in Liverpool that felt more like a trial. A captain named Thornton tore into him, accusing him of breaking the Naval Discipline Act. Thornton asked him why he disobeyed orders. Walker looked him in the eye and said, "Because the standard settings don't work." The room went quiet. "You don't talk to senior officers like that." Thornton was furious, pointing out that they had sunk 47 U-boats with the old method. Walker fired back that they had attacked over 1,000 contacts to get those 47 kills. That's a failure rate of nearly 97%. He explained the math again, the blind spot, the crash dive speed, the fact that the submarines were shallow when everyone thought they were deep. Admiral Noble, the man in charge of the western approaches, was watching this argument. He saw a man who was willing to throw away his rank to save lives. Instead of firing Walker, Noble gave him a chance. He told Walker to keep testing it for 6 months. If it didn't work, Walker was finished. 2 days later, on that freezing night in March 1941, the theory was put to the ultimate test. The HMS Walker and HMS Vanek were hunting two of Germany's top submarine aces, Otto Kretschmer and Joachim Schepke. These two men were legends in Germany, responsible for sinking dozens of ships. The British ships didn't just charge in blindly this time. They coordinated. One ship tracked the sub from a distance while the other attacked. And crucially, they used Walker's shallow depth settings. When the charges went off, the water turned black with oil. Then something incredible happened. U-99, Kretschmer's boat, popped up to the surface like a cork. The shallow explosions had cracked its hull before it could get deep. The crew came out with their hands up. Less than an hour later, they used the same tactic on U-100. They forced it to the surface and rammed it, killing Schepke. In one night, using the methods the Navy had tried to ban, they took out two of the three most dangerous U-boat commanders in the Atlantic. The Admiralty couldn't argue with results like that. The ban on Walker's methods quietly disappeared. Kill rates started to climb. By the end of the year, Walker's shallow settings had doubled the effectiveness of the entire fleet. But Walker wasn't done. He kept innovating. Later in the war, he developed something called the creeping attack. This was even more brilliant. He realized that submarines could hear the destroyers coming because of their loud engines. So he had two ships work together. One ship would stay back and ping the sub with sonar, acting as the spotter. The second ship would turn its engines way down and creep forward slowly, almost silently. The submarine captain, hearing nothing, would think he was safe. He wouldn't know the attack was coming until the depth charges were raining down on top of him. It was brutal, effective, and terrified the Germans. They sent messages to their fleet warning that the British had some new secret weapon. They didn't know it wasn't a new technology. It was just a captain who knew how to think differently. Walker commanded the second support group aboard the HMS Starling, and they became a hunting pack. In one patrol in 1944, they sank 6 U-boats in a single trip. They were playing music over the ship as loudspeakers every time they returned to port, usually, "A hunting, we will go." The crews loved him. They called his tactics Walker's way, but there was a cost. Walker drove himself harder than anyone else. He stayed at sea for 18 months with barely a break. He was fighting a personal war, obsessed with protecting the convoys. He told people he felt like he was personally fighting every U-boat in the ocean. On July 9, 1944, just days after returning from another successful patrol, Frederick John Walker died in a hospital in Liverpool. The doctors said it was a cerebral thrombosis, a stroke, but everyone knew the real cause. He had worked himself to death. He was 48 years old. Thousands of people lined the streets for his funeral. Winston Churchill wrote that Walker did more to free the Atlantic than any other single officer. But despite saving thousands of merchant seamen and sinking more submarines than anyone else in history, he never got a knighthood. He never became an admiral. The Navy used his tactics to win the war, but the establishment never quite forgave him for being right when they were wrong. The legacy he left behind is in the numbers. Before Walker, the kill rate was 3%. After his methods were adopted, it jumped to over 7%, and his own group's success rate was far higher. It's estimated that his innovation saved about 15,000 lives. It is a reminder that sometimes the most important innovations don't come from the top down. They don't come from committees or official research labs. Sometimes they come from the guy in the field who is tired of seeing things fail. The guy who sits in his cabin late at night doing the math that everyone else is too busy to check. Walker showed that you don't always need a better weapon to win. Sometimes you just need to stop doing what you've always done and start looking at what is actually happening right in front of you. He broke the rules. He ignored his superiors. And because of that, thousands of sailors made it home who otherwise would have been lost to the dark, freezing waters of the Atlantic.